Can everyone see it okay?
Yeah.
Okay, let me know if I need to zoom in on it. Okay, first one says to show that 2x plus 1 times x plus 5 is always bigger than x squared plus 11x. Always bigger than just means we write the equation again. That's what we mean. Always bigger than. Okay. Okay. So if we've got an equation like this, we'll expand it first. And I'll simplify the like terms. And if you got to this stage, then that's an achieve mark. Okay, because you've expanded and simplified, that's an achieve skill. So Vinny, you're going to be talking on the webcam thing and it's going to just ruin the video. Same for you, Jack. Right. The last thing we've got to do is if I bring everything over to the one side, so I'll minus x squared and minus 11x from both sides. That's going to leave me with x squared, that will cancel off, plus 5 greater than 0. Okay, x squared. What do you know about x squared?
It's x times x.
It's x times x. What do you know about a number times itself? Yeah, it can be square rooted, but x squared itself has to be 0 or bigger, right? So it always has to be 0 or positive. The number 5, well, that's positive too. So if you get a number that is greater than or equal to 0, and you add to that a number that's greater than 0, then the sum of these two is going to have to be positive. And that proves that this side is always bigger than that. Okay, all we did was rearrange, but we're proving by this always being bigger than 0, we know that. That's something we can say. Therefore, this side has to always be bigger than that side. That is a merit question. Okay, so just getting to this point, we've simplified your equation. That's achieved. Answering the question and just making that little statement is a merit question. Okay, the next, any questions on that? You're welcome to ask questions on it if you've got one. Right, the second question, for what values of x is y negative? Well, I would start by answering that question as though it was any other quadratic that you had to solve. So I would say solve it as though it's equal to 0. Right, what makes that equation equal to 0?
This is a question. What does it mean when it says let y equal?
It just means, here's your equation. I wouldn't worry about that. We're just saying y is equal to. So to make that equal to 0, x has to be 4. We all good with that? X has to be 4. So that'll make this bracket equal to 0. Or this bracket here has to be equal to 0. So that's 3x minus 4 has to equal 0. Therefore 3x has to equal 4 if I bring the 4 over to the right hand side. And x is going to be equal to 4 over 3. Okay, if that was a quadratic that you're solving, that'd be the two answers. But we want to know not where is y 0, but where is it negative. So there's a couple of ways you can solve that. Either it's going to be between those two values or on the outside of those two values. So either it's going to be when x is between 4 over 3 and 4, or it's going to be when x is less than 4 over 3 and when x is bigger than 4. So there's two possible options, because although we didn't really cover the graphs, a quadratic looks like that. and that's your two values that we found. Or a quadratic could look like the same thing but upside down. And either y is negative here in this region there, or y is negative here and there, which is the two options I've outlined. So you have to decide which one of those it is. And there's two ways to decide. The first one is to pick a number between 4/3 and 4 and put it in and see what you get. So if I took the number 2, I just have to put the number 2 into this equation and see if I get a negative value. Or there's kind of a shortcut way, which is to say, if I expand this, so let's expand this equation just here. What do I get? What's the first thing I get? Right, that's as far as you need to go to tell, because if this number here is a positive number, then it's going to look like this. It's an upright, it's a, I don't want to say, it's a happy parabola. Right? If it's a sad parabola, it's because that number is negative. Right? So because this number here is positive, you've got this one, which means your answer is where x is between 4/3 and 4. Right? If you just solve this and found the two answers, that's an achieved. If you found the range of values which make x, the range of values for x which make y negative, then that's the merit question. Okay. Any questions on that? Yeah. You got a question? Nope. Okay. In that case, question C. Give the hypotenuse of the triangle shown as a simplified expression involving W. So we have given Pythagoras' theorem, which is short side squared plus short side squared equals the hypotenuse squared. So A is W minus 4, B is 2W, or the other way around, it doesn't matter, and C is, well, we don't know, it's written as a question mark. So using Pythagoras' theorem, I can say that the thing we don't know squared is equal to this side, A squared, plus B squared. We happy with that? Are there any questions about that point there?
Where did the squared come on the question mark?
So that's A side B and side C.
Yeah.
So the Pythagoras is A squared plus B squared C squared. So just say whatever that is squared.
Okay.
So that thing squared equals, now I'll expand and simplify this. So that's going to be W squared minus 4W, because don't forget that's W minus 4 times W minus 4. That's what the squared means. So if I expand this, it's W squared minus 4W minus 4W again plus 16. And in this part here, because that squared is outside the bracket, I have to square everything, so it's going to be plus 4W squared. Because 2W, the 2 gets squared as well.
How did you get the 16?
How do I get 16? Negative 4 times negative 4. So doing FOIL, F-O-I-L, FOIL. Right, so simplify this. The 4 and the 1W squared goes to 5W squared minus 8W plus 16, and that's equal to my hypotenuse, which I don't know what it is, squared. If you got to this point here, I think that was your achieve mark. Thank you. Yeah, let me know if I do that too often. This point here is your achieve mark, but the hypotenuse is just that side there, so it's just going to be the square root of all of that. Okay, and that's your merit mark there. Questions on that one? Right.
Okay, we got that.
Okay, for the inequality, give the range of values that x has to be. Well, if you see an inequality, my advice is just pretend it's not an inequality, just pretend it's an equation. But don't forget, if you ever have to divide or multiply by a negative number, you've got to flip it around. So just pretend we're treating this like any other equation. I'm going to start by dividing both sides by 10. Then I want to get x by itself, so I'm going to have to get rid of that 4. So I'll minus 4 from both sides. Now, I'm not trying to solve for what negative x is, I want positive x. So I'm going to have to divide by negative 1. So negative x divided by negative 1 is just x. 8 divided by negative 1 is negative 8. And I divided by a negative number, so this needs to flip around and go backwards. Right, so the range of values, x has to be less than negative 8. Investigate square numbers for x that would satisfy the inequality. Well, what's a square number? Well, a square number is the result of something times by itself. So 4 is one of them. 9, 81, yeah. So, well, 0, I suppose you can include 0. 0 squared is 0, 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4, so it's 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, and so on. But what do you know about squared numbers? They can only be positive. And because you need numbers that are less than negative 8, there's no positive numbers less than negative 8, so the answer is square numbers are all positive. So there's none would work. Anything along those lines, explaining that you know a squared number wouldn't fit the bill. Okay, that question, if you got the first part right, and then answered that, then that would give you an excellence mark. Okay, any questions on that one? Right, this question here, I did it with my other class doing the MCAT and I did it wrong, so, you know, it's kind of tricky. I'll show what I did wrong, actually. I did it twice. The first time I did it right, then I did it wrong the second time. Don't know if that makes it better. So we need to think about what we know. Well, you know the karaoke machine cost $90, right? And you've got, well, how many friends are going to this thing? It's a group of friends. How many in that group? Zzz. That'd be a Z sound, would be zzz. How do you say X? Yes. So because there's X friends, then how much are you going to pay? Well, it's 90 divided by X. Okay, we don't know what that is yet. But how much are they going to pay afterwards? How many friends do you have in the second situation? 90 divided by X minus 4. So they're not equal though. You're not paying the same amount both times. Which one are you paying more? The second one. So this one here is going to be the same as this one plus $6 more, right? So the original amount plus $6 more is what they're paying in the second one. Right, that's the tricky concept, so it's best to sort of say it out in your head so you know what's happening, because that's the bit that I put the 6 on that side and it ruined everything. Okay, I want to know how many friends I've got. So it's a case of solving for x, which is how many friends were at the start. So to solve for x, well, it's on the bottom of a fraction. That doesn't help, so I need to bring it on the top. So to get x on the top here, I'm going to have to multiply by x. So I've got to multiply everything by x. So I'm going to multiply through by x. That's going to give me 90 plus 6x equals 90x. X minus 4. What?
Because you're timing everything by x.
Yeah, so if I times that by x, it'll cancel off here. Right, I need to get rid of this thing on the bottom here, so I'm going to multiply everything by x minus 4. So that's going to give me 90x minus 4 plus 6x times x minus 4 equals 90x. Okay, and that's the one that cancels off this time. Right, this looks a little bit better because there's no fractions. I'm going to expand, simplify, and bring it all over to the one side. So that's 90x minus 360 plus 6x squared minus 24x. And I'll bring that 90 across to this side, so it'll be minus 90x equals 0. Right, I'll just get all the like terms together. So 6x squared, these two will cancel off, so it'll leave me with minus 24x minus 360 equals 0. Any questions about what I did there? Right, so this is a quadratic where the first number isn't 1. So these can be tricky, but this one's not because there's a 6 that can be taken out of everything, right? So I'm going to factor out the 6, and that's going to leave me with x squared minus 4x minus 60. Alright, so if I want to factorize this, it's going to be 6 times my 2 brackets x. Now I need two numbers that multiply to give me negative 60 and add to give me negative 4. 10 and 6. Negative 10. Negative 6. No. Positive 6. Okay, so what two values for x can we get there? What two values solve that equation?
X equals 10, x equals negative 6.
So x equals 10 and x equals negative
But
6.
you can't have negative 6 friends in this.
You can't have negative 6. So, because x is the number of friends, and unless you're me, you can't have negative friends. So, it has to be the positive value. So, identify that you're only interested in x being positive. So, it has to be that one. So, how many friends are we paying for the machine?
10.
No, not 10. X was the original amount of friends.
Minus 4.
So it's going to be x minus 4, so 6 friends. Spelt friends wrong. 6 friends. 6 friends. Okay, any question about that one? That's an excellent question.
I kind of got it, but not really.
So for excellence, you had to dismiss this solution here because you can't have negative friends. Yep.
I kind of got that, but I didn't realize you got it.
You might get an achieve for guess and check. Did you get the answer 6?
Yeah.
Let me look at that afterwards. If it affects your mark, then you should get an achieve. Okay, question 2.
I already have an achieve.
Then it won't matter, but it should have been. Okay. Question 2. When we're trying to solve for the power, so we're trying to solve for the number up the top here, you can't really do anything with that unless you've got the base number being the same. So we need 2 to the power of something equals 2 to the power of something else, and then solving for that. But because we've got a 20 as our base number, we can't really get past that yet. So the first thing I want to do here is just divide both sides by 5. Okay, that looks a bit more promising because what do you know about the number 4?
It's a square number.
It's yes, and in particular it's the square of 2. So I'm going to write it as 2 squared. Right, that's a lot better because if I know 2 to the power of something equals 2 to the power of something, those two bits at the top have to be the same. So that means we can just write the powers as its own. That should be a 3, sorry. X minus 3 equals 2. Therefore, x has to be 5. But you're told to solve that. And in a question like that where it says just do this and it's only one skill really, it's an achieved question. Okay.
I did it a different way.
Did you get the answer right?
Yeah, I got the answer.
What did you do?
I just did 10, I times it. I just expanded the brackets and then divided it.
How did you expand the brackets?
Did 5 times 2. And then
Yeah,
ended
but
up dividing 10 by 3. That's what I did by 3.
you shouldn't be able to expand the brackets though, because it's not the same base.
Oh, well, I guess I just have to out.
Okay. Question 2b.
Jordan, you're down, buffoon.
Oh. Alright, we're trying to write a formula for the cost of the tiles. It's $10 per tile plus a $20 delivery fee. Give a formula for how much it will cost for n sections. But before we do that, we need a rule for how many tiles are in each section. So, how many tiles do we add every time to a new section?
4.
So, if there's n sections, the rule is going to be 4 tiles for every extra section we add on. Okay, so if this is the third one, then 4 times n, when n is 3, is equal to 13. But it's not. I have to add 1 to the rule before we get that. Okay, so the rule is going to be 4n because it goes up by 4 each time, and then plus 1 to make the rule work. So that's the rule for how many tiles. So that's how many tiles we have. So and if it costs $10 per tile, it's going to be 10 times the number of tiles plus a $20 delivery fee. And you should expand this and simplify it. So it will cost you 40n plus 30, and that's it. That's a merit question if you answer to there. I think if you just didn't expand and simplify it, then that would have been an achieve still. If you think you got that and it didn't get marked down, then make a note of it and ask me afterwards. Yep.
Me and Ag's got an achieve for just saying 10x plus 20 equals n.
That's what I did.
10x plus 20.
Yeah, I got achieved that as well.
Oh yeah, well done. I don't know why you got that. Good on you. Okay. Unless there's any questions, we'll move on to part C. Show that the side length of a cube can't be a whole number. What do you know about the side of a cube? What shape is it?
6 sides.
There's 6 sides in a cube. Well done. What do you know about the side of a cube? What shape is it?
Square.
It's a square. Okay. So if it's a square, because the faces of this cube are all the same square, then each side, if this side here is x, then this side here is also x, right? So that means the area is x squared. Okay, are we happy with that? So I'm just going to look at the total surface area. Total surface area is 570 and there's 6 sides on a cube. So I'm going to divide 570 by 6 and that's going to equal 95. Okay, so each one of those squares has to have an area of 95 centimeters squared. What number squared gives 95? Well, what's 9 squared?
81.
What's 10 squared?
100.
So it's not a whole number, right?
Yeah.
It's 9.
Because 95 isn't a square number, therefore okay, so since 95 is not a square number, the sides can't be whole numbers. Otherwise it would look like one of those familiar square numbers like 81 or 100. Right, part 2. So see if you answer all of it. Find the value of x. Well, 4x squared minus 5 equals 95. So that's one of the sides. So that's the formula for a side, and that's the value of a side. 4x squared equals 100. X squared equals 25. Therefore, x equals What's the square root of 25? Or negative 5. But we're talking about distances, so you don't need that negative value. You can't have a side length which is negative. So just plus 5 for that one. Right. Any questions on that? Just that, the square root of 25 is 5. Just positive value is all we need. Okay, question 2D. Fully factorise. You're told what to do, so it's just going to be an achieved question, this one. Although the tricky part is, the number in front of the x squared isn't 1, so that makes that a bit trickier. Also, you can't factorise out the 2, so you can't do it that way either. So you can do that a times c rule where you multiply these two numbers, but you also don't have to do that, because what do you know about the number 2 and the number 3? This a value here and that 3 there. Oh yeah, they multiply to give 6. Now, what do you know about those numbers individually? Yeah, Felix?
Well, you gotta times them together.
Now that's one strategy that you can do, but I'm just going to show you how to get to the shortcut answer. Because, and you can just guess these because 2 and negative 3, and this was the note on front of that workbooklet I gave you, they're both prime numbers. What are the factors? The factors of a prime number are 1 and that number. So, Jax, I'm going to need to ask you to be quiet again. Thanks. So, because the factors of 2, because they're both prime numbers, this is going to be really quick. The factors of 2 are 2 and 1. Okay, so there's no other options for that. And the factors of negative 3 are negative 3 and 1, or negative 1 and 3. So either we put the negative 3 here and the 1 there. So I'll try that one. Negative 3 and positive 1. When I expand this out, I'm going to get 2x squared plus 2x minus 3x minus 3. And those two combine to give me negative x, so that doesn't work. Okay? But because it's prime numbers, I'll just switch those around. I'll make that plus 1, I'll make that negative 3. Let's do it again. 2x squared minus 6x plus x minus 3. Yep. And those two will simplify to give negative 5x. Well, that's it. So the answer, trial and error works just fine when you've got prime numbers. Because there's only, I could have swapped the negatives around, but there's only 4 options for how you do that. It's not like 6 where I had to try 1 and 6 and 2 and 3. I only had 2 options there. Okay, this next question. Any questions about that one? About D?
That's an achieved question. That's
an achieved question because you're told what to do. Right, a rugby field is 100 meters long. So how far does Francis have to run?
100 meters.
Good, Francis has to run 100 meters. And this distance here is exactly in the middle. So that's going to be 25 and that's going to be 25. So how far does Philip have to run? Or Phil? 150.
How can the person run 4 meters a second?
So, okay, if a person runs 100 meters at 4 meters per second, it's got to take him 25 seconds. Can you do the 100 meters in under 25 seconds?
Hell yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Hold on, 20, right? You'd be right. So,
It just seems like a lot, like 4 meters a second seems like a lot.
yeah.
About using both
Turns out
10
it's not.
10 meters in 1
But
second.
I'm not using what?
Okay. So that's Philip's speed. Philip, we're not on Phil, since we're buddies. Velocity equals distance. Oh no, don't bail. Velocity equals distance divided by time. What am I doing? time, we know his distance, right? What's Philip's distance? His distance is 150. How long does it take him?
25 seconds.
We know he does it in the same amount of time. Am I doing this right? Yes, I am. So we know he does 150 meters in the same amount of time as Francis took. So therefore, 150 divided by 25 is 6 meters per second.
I got that right.
Well done.
But they gave me a not achieved.
They gave you a not achieved.
Yeah.
I'll look at it afterwards.
That's such balls.
Okay, no.
Let's see.
Okay, so that's the achieved and merit. If you got merit, if you got that answer right.
What's the little thing about the 6 emails? What's the minus 1? Okay.
You're banging the camera when you do it. Oh, okay, it was you then, was it?
But actually, it was me.
Just waiting for quiet again. Just a reminder, the wait for the chatter will have to be on the video as well. Okay. M over S means meters per second. Don't do that. And because the S is on the bottom, 1 over S can be written as S to the power of -1, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's why we write it like that. It just means meters per second. Because distance divided by time is your speed. So that's why the units is meters per second. Right. The distance is getting changed.
Can you just say 6 meters per second?
Yes.
Instead of just
Yeah, that'd be fine. The distance is getting shifted down now. We don't know how far. So what do we normally call something we don't know?
Yes.
May as well, right? So the distance Phil is going to have to run is now going to be 150 plus 2x. Right? So his velocity is equal to 150 plus 2x divided by how long is it going to take him? It's the same amount of time, so it's still going to take 25 seconds. We know his speed this time. What's his speed? His velocity? 7. So we can write this as a 7. Now I just have to solve for x. So 7 times 25 is 175. So I'm just multiplying both sides by 25. I'm going to subtract 150 from both sides. I'm going to divide both sides by 2. X will be equal to 12.5. So this extra distance just here is going to be 12.5. Plus I'll add on the 25 that was originally the distance. So 25 plus 12.5 means 37.5 meters will be the new distance from the corner that'll be shifted.
Can you go down again? Oh, I see the way.
I was showing the diagram, but yeah. So that's it, just there. Right. Excellence for that one. Any questions on that? Question 3. The sum of 3 consecutive odd numbers. Now, consecutive odd numbers follow 2 apart. So if your first one is going to be x, the next one has to be x plus 2. Otherwise, it's just consecutive numbers. X plus 4. That's your consecutive numbers. The sum of those numbers is x plus 2 plus x plus 4 equals 75. So 3x plus 6 equals 75. That's my equation. and if I solve it, I'll get 3x equals 69. 69 divided by 3 is 23, not 13, for those of you who wrote 13.
Oh my god.
If you guessed and checked, then you could get an achieved off that one. But if you used algebra, you could get your merit mark.
Yes.
Right.
Wait, sir, the sum is crossing, isn't it?
Yes, not times. Product. 75 is a multiple of 5. What other multiples of 5 would you be able to get? Well, if n is a whole number, then 5n is the multiple of 5, right? If n is 1, then that's 5. If n is 2, then it's 10, 15, 20. So that's all the multiples of 5. 3x plus 6 has to equal a multiple of 5. So what does x have to be? Well, 3x equals 5n minus 6. X equals 5 over 3n minus 2. So what sort of number would work for n to give you a whole number? It'll have to be a multiple of 3, right? Because if it's divided by 3, then it has to be a multiple of 3 to be a whole number. Question? No, just okay. So because of this, you have to identify that your number has to be a multiple of 3, and it has to be a multiple of 5, therefore it has to be a multiple of 15. That's what the answer schedule says, but what's a number that's a multiple of 15? We've got 30. What's 3 consecutive odd numbers that add up to 30? It doesn't work, right? It doesn't work. That's 3 consecutive even numbers. So it has to be a multiple of 15, but not a multiple of 10. But if you just write it has to be a multiple of 15, that was enough for an excellence anyway. Or if you write it has to be a multiple of 3 after 2 is subtracted, that's good too. Right, question D. This one seemed to be quite tricky. I would like you, if you got this one wrong, to focus on this for your study, because although it looks confusing, there's only a very fixed number of steps that there could be for it. So it's a good place to study. It says, give a formula that calculates how many rotations. Right, what variable tells you how many rotations? Number of rotations is n. So I want to rearrange my formula for n. So let's just look at this equation here. What's the first thing that happens to n? So here's n. What's the first thing that happens to it? It's multiplied, times by 2 pi r. After that, it is squared. After that, we add h squared. After that, we do the square root, and that gives you what d is. So we're going to do that backwards, and d, can't even spell a letter. We're going to go backwards, and at each step we'll just reverse the operations in reverse order. Right, working backwards, what's the opposite of a square root?
Squared.
Square, so we'll square both sides. D squared equals 2n pi r squared plus h squared. What's the opposite of plus h squared? Minus h squared equals 2n pi r all squared. What's the opposite of squaring? Square root. So we'll square root both sides. D squared minus h squared equals 2n pi r. What's the opposite of timesing by 2 pi r? Dividing by 2 pi r. So we'll do that. The square root of d squared minus h squared divided by 2 pi r equals n. Right, that's merit. Not that much, you just have to identify, and remember, I identified these. How do I know what order to put them in? Yeah, but how do I know that I multiplied by that before I squared? Bed mass, Bob mass, whatever you call it. Okay, that's all you needed. Toby.
How do you tell that you meant to just rearrange the equation?
it says give a formula, so not an answer, just a formula that calculates how many rotations. So if you want to calculate rotations, then the output has to be the number of rotations. So that's the thing that has to be by itself, is the thing that you're trying to calculate, right? Did that answer your question? Kind of. Okay. Anyone else reckon they can answer that better? Because I don't really know what.
I guess if I see a question like that, I'll just
Yeah. Okay. This one tripped up a lot of people. If I change pi to be 3, if I use pi equals 3 instead, would I overestimate or underestimate? Well, look at your equation. You're dividing by pi. What's 10 divided by 2? What's 10 divided by 1.9? Yeah, 5, bigger than 5, right? So if I decrease the number I'm dividing by, the answer is going to get bigger. That make sense? So if I decrease this number from 3.1415 whatever, just down to 3, because I'm decreasing the denominator, the result's going to get bigger, and it's going to be an overestimate. Okay, so overestimate, you could say because decreasing denominator. I'm not even on the screen. Okay, it's an overestimate because you're decreasing the number on the bottom. Right, questions on that one? Nearly done. C, solve. What level of question is this going to be? Achieved. All I have to do is solve for n. I can't combine these two yet because one of them is a fraction, so I'll just multiply everything by 4. Multiply both sides by 4. I'll expand it out. I'll bring the 8n over to this side, so it's going to be negative 5n equals negative 8. Yep.
When I think 18 minus 32,
Thank you. You're right. And now we'll divide both sides by negative 5. So n will be negative 32 over negative 5, which is, well, 32 over 5. I think I gave you that one. Or 6.4 if you want it as a decimal. Okay, that's it. That's the answer for that one. Any questions on it? Okay, this question here, I've put some questions up on Classroom which are similar to this one and the rearranging one we just did. The reason being that the MCAT, as you've seen, is quite wordy, so I've focused on the wordy questions, and in particular the simultaneous equation ones where you have to first decide what your equations are going to be. So if we look at this, we've got fish and hot dogs. What do we know? What's one thing we know? Yeah, one fish is $3, one hot dog is $2.50. Each student is getting one or the other. What don't we know?
How many
of each they bought?
how many things
How many of each she bought?
Yep. How many of each kind she bought, right? So, how many fish did she buy? The number of fish. How many did she buy? Well, we don't know, so let's call it F. How many hot dogs did she buy? Number of hot dogs. Don't know, let's call it H. How many did she buy all up?
18.
Well, it was 18 students. So the number of fish plus the number of hot dogs has to equal 18. How much did she spend all up? Yeah, 51 is the total spent. How much did she spend on fish?
Yeah.
$3 for every fish. She bought F number of fishes. Fishes or fish? What's the, I don't know. Fish eye. She bought, so she spent 3F on fish because the amount she spent on each fish was $3 times the number of fish she bought is 3F. Same for hot dogs. 2.5 times the number of hot dogs. Okay, I'm convinced that's the hardest part of this question, is just getting the question written down. So now we're going to solve it. We're going to use, I'll call this equation 1 and equation 2. You don't have to number them, but as long as you're aware that you're going to be doing something with both those equations together. I'm going to use the elimination method here. You don't have to, but I'm going to. It's easiest if you've got the same number in front of one of these variables to eliminate it. So I'm going to multiply the top equation by 3. So if I multiply the top equation by 3, it's going to be 3f plus 3h equals 3 times 18, which is 54. So that's equation 1 again. Right, this is good because I've got 3f in both. So if I subtract one from the other, the 3f will cancel off. So I'm going to go equation 2, and I'm going to subtract equation 1. So 3f minus 3f is 0. I've eliminated the f variable. 2.5h minus 3h is negative 0.5h. And this is equal to 51 minus 54, which is negative 3. Okay, if you subtracted the other equations around, you'll get 2 positives. I'll divide by negative 0.5. H is going to be equal to 6. Remember, 3 divided by a half is the same as multiplying by 2. Okay, if you divide by a half, so 3 divided by a half, how many halves will fit into 3? Yep, 2 in each one, so 2 times 3. So that's why dividing by a half is the same as multiplying by 2. So h is equal to 6. F plus h equals 18. F plus 6 equals 18. F equals 12. So you have to say the number of fish equals 12 and the number of hot dogs equals 6. Because if you just look at the answer schedule on the correct page, says you have to have a contextual answer. Jax, I'll just ask you to be quiet again, thanks. Right, this last one. If you answered this part right, it was an excellence question. Okay, in the first, oh, Jamie. Yep. Where did this equation come from? All I did was I multiplied every single part of this by 3. If I think of the equation 7 plus 3 equals 10, if I multiply 7 by 3, I get 21. If I multiply 3 by 3, I get 9. If I multiply 10 by 3, I get 30. So it proves that you can multiply everything by a number, and the equation will stay the same, right? So really, these two equations are exactly the same equation. All good? The reason I do this is so that I've got this part here which will cancel off. Felix? Yeah, you can. Right, this last question though, because we're not quite done. One more question. If she spends S dollars in the class, right, in part 1, how much did she spend?
51.
In part 2, how much did she spend? Right, it's exactly the same question. There's still the same number of students, so F plus H equals 18. 3F is how much she spent on fish, plus 2.5H is how much she spent on hot dogs. Miko, when you're done with watching your video, we'll continue. Those two numbers add up to S. Lawrence. Be quiet, thanks. No, I'm interested in this. So I'm going to multiply this equation by 3 again. So 3F plus 3H equals 54. That's an S, not a 5. And I'm going to rearrange, so I've got an equation for calculating H, which is the same thing you asked about before. Because I want to calculate H, that means it rearrange for H. So I'm going to get rid of this variable here. So 2.5H minus 3H equals negative 0.5h. S minus 54. Okay, so I'm just going equation 1. Alright, it's equation 2 minus equation 1. Dividing by negative a half is the same as multiplying by 2. Negative 2, right? Divide by half is the same as multiplying by 2. So, thank you. So I'm going to divide both sides by negative a half, which is the same as multiplying by negative 2. That's S. And that's going to expand to negative 2s plus 108. Or 108 minus 2s. So that's the formula for calculating how many hot dogs if you know how much is spent. Miko, thank you. I'll ask you once again just to be quiet while I'm trying to record. That there is an excellent answer. Okay, but did I do anything different from what I did here apart from leaving s in instead of 54? It's exactly the same process. So it really wasn't any harder, even though it was worth an excellence mark. Okay, if you got a single U mark, you got 1A for that question. So for question 1, if you got one achieved question right, you got an A. If you got two achieves or more, you got a 2A. If you got no achieves but you got one of the merit marks right, you go straight to an M. 2 R's is 2 M's. Overall, for achieved, you had to get at least 3 A's. And for merit, you had to get 2 M's, although an E would substitute down. And for excellence, you needed 2 E's on that, which, looking at last year's MCAT, is very similar to their marking schedule, except in last year's MCAT, if you didn't get 3 A's, but instead you got 1 A and 1 M, last year's MCAT that was good enough for an achieve, but this year's it wasn't on this practice one. So I'm not sure if it's going to be good enough or not. But that's roughly what you're looking at. Grace.
Is this the same kind of thing? The same
Yes, yes. This is the closest thing to what you'll get probably that we've covered.
You can put
Right.
questions online.